boy on the Omaha Beach. The sound of the waves crashing against the beach, so rhythmic, so constant, might have been soothing if it weren't for the shouts, the gunfire, the screams of men who had already realized they wouldn't make it through the day. The air was thick, not with the salt of the sea, but with a heavy scent of fear and blood. 6 hours had passed since the landing, but the chaos hadn't calmed. It hadn't even slowed down. And all I could do was keep moving, try not to think too much, try not to fall apart. Because when you do that, when you start to think, that's when the panic hits. That's when your body remembers it's human. I remember the first time the bullets flew by me. They were like angry wasps, buzzing by my ear and slamming into the sand at my feet. But it wasn't the sound of the bullets that got to me. It was the way the sand exploded in every direction like some kind of violent, twisted bloom, the earth splitting open just inches away from me. And that's when I understood. This wasn't just a fight. This was survival. You've probably heard the stories, read the reports, seen the movies. You know about Omaha Beach, the hell we faced that morning, but I promise you, none of them come close to what we lived through. None of them tell you what it's really like when your boots hit that sand, and you realize that you have no idea how you're going to get to the other side. My unit was supposed to land at the easternmost stretch of Omaha, but nothing went according to plan. We came in under the cover of artillery fire, sure, but the German guns were faster, more accurate. The moment we hit the shore, the beach became a slaughterhouse. Men fell all around me. Some were screaming. Some were silent, already gone. Others tried to crawl, their legs useless, their faces twisted in pain. The air was so thick with smoke and dust I could hardly see my own hand in front of my face. We had barely made it past the water when I saw him. A kid, no older than 18, his face pale under the helmet, eyes wide with panic. He looked like a deer caught in headlights. I didn't know his name then. Hell, I didn't even know he was going to save me, but he did. He pulled me into a crater just as a burst of machine gun fire ripped through the air where I'd been standing just seconds before. I didn't have time to thank him. I didn't have time to do anything but follow his lead. He didn't speak much. Maybe he didn't know how to. Maybe he didn't need to. His hands were steady, and his movements were precise, like he'd been trained for this moment his entire life. When I looked up, there he was, dragging me toward a bunker, his hands covered in blood, but still pulling me forward. Every now and then he'd glance at me, as if making sure I was still alive, still breathing. I think about him a lot, that kid. He didn't need to help me. There were dozens of men around us, all fighting for their lives. But he chose to pull me out of the line of fire. And just as quickly, he disappeared. One minute, I saw him there, and the next, he was gone like he had never existed at all. The last time I saw him, he was helping a wounded man, and when I tried to go back to help, the shelling got worse. It was like the earth was splitting open all around us, and by the time it stopped, that kid had vanished. I'll never know if he made it out, if he was one of the lucky few to survive that hell. All I know is that he saved my life, and I've never been able to forget the look in his eyes. The way they looked at me, like he had seen something in me, something worth saving. But in this war, there's no room for heroes, not really. You can save someone today, but there's no guarantee you'll survive to see tomorrow. The battlefield doesn't care about your intentions, your actions, or your name. It only cares about what you can do to stay alive. The next few hours were a blur. I moved from one position to another, dragging myself through the mud and the blood, doing everything I could to stay out of the line of fire. Every time I thought I had found some form of safety, the Germans would send another wave of bullets flying. The sound was deafening, and the earth beneath me seemed to tremble with every blast. But amid the chaos, I kept thinking about that kid. I tried to tell myself that maybe he made it out, that he was somewhere out there, fighting just like me. But deep down, I knew the truth. I knew what the odds were, what the chances were that he'd made it out. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about that moment had been different. That maybe he had been something more than just another soldier. Maybe he had been an angel sent to pull me out of the fire, and then just as quickly, he vanished, like a shadow fading into the smoke. I guess that's the thing about war. You never know what to believe. You never know who you're going to meet or what they'll mean to you. You can go through your whole life wondering, questioning, and never get an answer. But that's the way it works, right? Sometimes you never get closure. Sometimes you just have to live with a question. The sky was a pale gray when I finally found some semblance of shelter, a broken-down wall that offered a little cover from the barrage of gunfire. I didn't care about the beach anymore. I didn't care about the mission. All I cared about was staying alive, getting through this madness. But you can never really escape it. The war seeps into you, attaches itself to your bones, to your heart, until you can't tell where it ends and you begin. The noise, the constant sound of firing, the screams, the explosions, it all becomes a part of you, whether you want it to or not. I had no idea where the others in my unit had gone. The chaos had fractured us all into small, scattered groups, each of us trying to find our way through the mess. But when you're in a place like Omaha Beach, finding your way is impossible. The sand is stained with blood, the air heavy with gunpowder and salt water. There's nothing left to orient you. The world is broken, and you're just trying to find a way to hold yourself together piece by piece. I remember staring at the horizon, trying to find some sense of direction, when I heard it, a shout, faint but unmistakable, coming from behind the broken wall. I crouched lower, heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, I thought it might be a German soldier trying to draw me out. But then I heard it again. A voice, desperate, calling my name. I knew that voice. It was the kid, the one who had saved me. I couldn't believe it. My mind couldn't process it. I had convinced myself that he was gone, that I would never see him again. But there he was, calling out to me, asking for help. I didn't waste time. My legs moved before my brain had a chance to question the logic of it. I crawled through the mud and the broken debris, my hands trembling with both fear and hope. Every step felt like an eternity. Every inch of ground felt like it could be the last one I gained. When I finally found him, he was pinned down behind a sand dune, his rifle lying beside him, its barrel smoking from the recent shots. His face was pale, his eyes wide with pain. He was wounded, badly it seemed. But there was something in his gaze, something I couldn't place, that made me hesitate. I knelt beside him, trying to get a better look at his injuries. He was bleeding from a wound in his leg, the blood dark and sticky against his uniform. But it wasn't just the wound that troubled me. It was the way he was looking at me. He wasn't frightened anymore. There was something different about him, something calm, almost knowing, like he'd seen the end and wasn't afraid of it anymore. "Help me," he whispered, his voice cracking, the words barely audible over the sound of the gunfire. "Please, don't leave me." I didn't want to leave him. How could I? After everything he'd done for me, after the way he pulled me out of that hell on the beach, how could I just walk away? But the war doesn't give you time for goodbyes. It doesn't give you time to think. It only gives you choices, and you have to make them fast, or you'll be dead before you know it. I did what I could to bandage his leg, using the cloth from my own uniform to try and slow the bleeding. It wasn't enough. I knew that, but I didn't have any better options. The sound of artillery fire was getting louder, closer. The Germans were closing in, pushing us back. "Listen," I said, my voice low but urgent. "I'll get help. I'll find the medic. Just hold on." But when I looked at him, I saw something that made my blood run cold. His eyes weren't just filled with pain anymore. They were empty, hollow, like something inside him had already gone, something I couldn't see but knew was there. He reached out with trembling fingers, grabbing my wrist. "You don't understand," he said, his voice so quiet I could barely hear it over the gunfire. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not real." For a moment, I didn't understand. But then the words hit me like a hammer to the chest. His grip tightened around my wrist, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Wait," I said, shaking my head, trying to make sense of it. "What are you talking about? You're real. You're right here." But the kid just smiled, a strange, sad smile, and then his grip loosened. His eyes closed, and his body went limp. I don't know what happened next. Time seemed to stop, like the world held its breath. I was still holding his hand when I heard the shout from behind me, a soldier calling for cover, telling us to fall back. I glanced around, and when I turned back to the kid, he was gone. Not dead. Not even a body. He was just gone. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the empty sand where he had been. The gunfire, the screams, everything around me continued, but in that moment, everything felt still, like the war had paused, waiting for me to understand something I couldn't. And then it hit me, the realization that maybe he wasn't just a soldier. Maybe he had been something more. But I couldn't hold on to that thought. It was too much. It didn't make sense. And maybe it wasn't supposed to. The orders came again. We had to move. We had to keep fighting. So I left. I didn't look back. But deep down, something inside me knew that kid had saved me, not just from the bullets, but from the darkness that was creeping in. Darkness I couldn't see, but I knew was there waiting. I couldn't explain what happened. I still can't. Maybe it was the stress, the exhaustion, or maybe it was something else. But that moment stayed with me. It followed me through the rest of the battle and beyond. And I still wonder to this day, did I see a ghost that day? Or did I meet a savior, someone sent to guide me through the worst hell I'd ever face? I didn't get the answers I wanted. I probably never will. But I carry that memory with me, like a burden I can't shake, no matter how far I run from it. It took me days to get back to some semblance of normalcy, if there even is such a thing in a place like this. The shelling didn't stop. The sound of gunfire echoed in my ears long after the battle had ended. But the thing that haunted me most wasn't the noise, the blood, or the endless faces of men I would never see again. No. What stuck with me, what gnawed at the back of my mind, was the memory of the kid, the one who had pulled me out of the line of fire and then vanished like he'd never been there at all. Days turned into weeks, and we moved inland, pushing through villages, dealing with skirmishes here and there, but the full force of the battle had shifted. And yet I couldn't shake it. I kept hearing his voice in my head, his words, the look in his eyes. He was out there. I knew it. And maybe he wasn't just some soldier, some random face in a crowd of war. Maybe he had been something more. I couldn't explain it, but deep down, I couldn't stop thinking about it. One night, while we were camped in a little French village, I overheard some of the men talking around the fire. They were joking, laughing, and for a moment, it almost felt normal, like before when we had been young men with futures ahead of us. But then one of them mentioned Omaha Beach. He wasn't even talking about the battle. He was talking about a soldier who had appeared out of nowhere, helped his unit, and then disappeared before anyone could even get his name. It was the strangest thing, but I froze. My blood went cold, and my breath caught in my throat. They were talking about him. The kid. I moved closer, trying to hear more, but one of the men caught sight of me and nodded in my direction. "You all right, soldier?" I forced a smile, but inside, I was anything but. Yeah, just a little lost in thought. They went back to their conversation, and I listened as they spoke about how this soldier, this kid, had seemed almost not real. Like he had appeared out of nowhere, helped them get out of a jam, and then just as quickly vanished. One minute he was there, the next, nothing. I couldn't stand it. I had to know more. I had to ask. So I took a deep breath and interrupted them, my voice shaking just a little. "You sure he was real? This guy you're talking about?" They all turned to look at me, confused. "Of course he was real," one of them said. "He saved our asses." But the thing is, no one knew who he was. No one saw him before, and no one saw him after. It's like he was, I don't know, a ghost or something. Hell, I don't even know if he made it out alive. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Ghost. The kid had been called a ghost, and for a moment, I wondered if that's exactly what he was. Maybe he had never been human at all. Maybe he had been something else entirely. I spent the rest of the night lying awake, staring at the ceiling of the makeshift shelter, my mind spinning. The more I thought about it, the less I understood. The kid had saved my life. He had pulled me from the line of fire, and when I looked at him, I saw something in his eyes that told me he wasn't just another soldier. But the more I tried to piece it all together, the more questions I had. I never did find out who he really was. I never saw him again. Some of the men I spoke to in the weeks after mentioned hearing similar stories about a soldier who had appeared at critical moments and then vanished. But no one knew where he came from. No one knew his name. Some said he was part of a special force. Others believed he had been sent from heaven itself. And then, just as easily, the stories faded away. Like everything else in the war. No one wanted to think about the things they couldn't explain. But me. I couldn't forget. I couldn't let it go. Every night, when I closed my eyes, I saw his face. Not the face of a soldier, but of someone who had been through the worst of it someone who had seen the horrors of war and come out the other side. His eyes weren't full of fear or anger. They were full of something else, something I didn't have the words for, something that made me feel like maybe he had been more than just a soldier. Maybe he had been a guide, or maybe even a ghost. I tried to move on. I tried to bury it all deep down, to push it out of my mind. But the truth is, you don't really move on from something like Omaha Beach. You don't just leave it behind. The memories stay with you. They shape you. They follow you, no matter where you go. And so, I kept thinking about that kid, the one who saved me and then disappeared. I don't know what happened to him, and I don't know if I'll ever understand it. But I know one thing for sure, he wasn't just another soldier. He wasn't just a name on a list or a face in a crowd. He was something more. And maybe that's the way it is with war. Sometimes you don't get the answers you want. Sometimes there are no neat conclusions. You live with the questions, and maybe, just maybe, that's all you can do. But that kid, the one on Omaha Beach, he stayed with me. His memory didn't fade. And maybe in some strange way, that was his legacy. It wasn't the battle that mattered in the end. It wasn't the victory or the defeat. It was the moments between. The moments of kindness in the middle of the hell. The briefest flashes of humanity that reminded us we were still alive. And so I asked myself, did he really disappear? Or was he always meant to stay with me, to remind me that even in the darkest of times, there's a light, even if you never understand it, even if it's never explained? I don't know if I'll ever get an answer. But in the quiet moments when I close my eyes, I can still hear his voice. And I wonder, maybe I wasn't the only one who needed saving that day. I wish I could tell you there was closure. I wish I could tell you I found peace with it, that I stopped searching for answers. But the truth is, after that day, there were only more questions. Questions that I carried with me for the rest of my life. Every time I saw a face in the crowd, I couldn't help but wonder, was it him? Was it the kid? Or maybe it was someone else, just another shadow of the war. A soldier who had come to do his part and then vanished without a trace. The war went on. We pushed deeper into France, fought our way through towns, through forests, through mud and blood. But the Battle of Omaha Beach, the brutality, the chaos, the faces I saw that day, never left me. I don't think it ever truly left any of us. I'd see flashes of it when I closed my eyes, when the sound of artillery wasn't so deafening, when the weight of the rifle on my shoulder didn't feel so heavy. And sometimes, just sometimes, I could hear his voice again. Faint, like an echo in the back of my mind, calling out to me. I didn't talk about it. No one did. No one ever really talked about Omaha. What happened there was too big, too monstrous to be spoken of in polite company, even if that company was made up of men who had been through hell together. You don't talk about things like that. You carry them, you live with them, but you don't speak them out loud. Not unless you want to crack wide open. Not unless you're ready to see just how much the world can take from you. And then came the end of the war, the victory, the celebrations, the relief. Everyone was ecstatic. The world had been torn apart, but now it was coming back together. And we were the ones who had made it happen. We were the ones who had fought and bled and survived. But in the back of my mind, there was always that one question. What happened to the kid? I went back home after the war. Tried to pick up where I had left off, if such a thing was possible. It was never the same, though. I never felt like I truly belonged there again. How could I? How could I ever feel at home again when part of me was still on that beach, still fighting, still searching? The world around me had moved on, but I hadn't. The things I had seen, the people I had lost, the boy who saved me, none of that could be erased by a few medals or a parade. I tried to live my life. I tried to build a future. But the war kept calling me back, like a cruel whisper in the dark. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart racing, hearing the distant sound of waves crashing, mixed with the thunder of guns. And every time I closed my eyes, I would see that kid again. Just for a second, his face would appear, as if he was still watching me, still there, somewhere out there in the dark. Years passed, and the memories started to blur. Faces became harder to remember, names harder to recall. But that moment on the beach, when he looked at me with those eyes, those knowing, empty eyes, I couldn't forget. I didn't want to, because I knew deep down there was something important there. something I hadn't figured out, and maybe I never would. One day, I was sitting in a bar, sipping a drink, trying to forget about the weight of it all. The door swung open, and a man walked in. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him at first. Then, as he walked closer, I saw it. The eyes, the same empty, haunting gaze that had stayed with me all these years. It was him, or at least it looked like him. The kid, the one from Omaha Beach. My heart skipped a beat. I stood up, but my legs felt weak beneath me. I didn't know what to do. My throat went dry. What if it wasn't him? What if I was imagining things again? But there was something about the way he moved, the way he held himself. It was like everything about him, the way he carried himself, the aura around him, was exactly the same as the kid I had met all those years ago. But when I opened my mouth to speak, to ask him who he was, to ask him if he knew what happened on that beach, he was gone. Vanish, just like that. I never saw him again. I searched, but he was gone. And for the first time in years, I wondered if the answers I was searching for, whether the boy was real or not, whether he had really saved me or not, were ever meant to be found. Maybe that was the real mystery. Maybe the story wasn't about the boy at all, but about the search. The endless, fruitless search for something that can't be explained. Maybe, in the end, the truth is that some things are meant to stay unsolved. Maybe the kid was just a ghost, a symbol of the hope we all need in the worst of times. Or maybe he was a real soldier lost in the chaos of war, and I was just one of many who never truly understood his story. But one thing I know for sure, the boy on Omaha Beach changed me. He saved me, whether he was real or not. And in some strange way, he still haunts me to this day. And maybe that's what war does. It leaves things behind, questions, memories, and sometimes even ghosts.